Ciao everyone and welcome to episode 17 of Voices of Italy Beyond La Dolce Vita. Here we go again with another Netflix movie inspiring an episode. Today we talk about Nonnas, Netflix's last Italy-themed movie released earlier this month and starring Vince Vaughn as Joe Scaravella, a real-life person who founded an Italian restaurant on Staten Island called Enoteca Maria to honor his late mother and his own nonna. Netflix Nonnas has the perfect recipe: a real life Italian American icon, a kitchen full of grandmothers with untold stories, and a chance to honor a legacy of migration, resilience, and tradition. A film that should have been a heartfelt tribute to the Italian American nonnas who carried out their culture across an ocean, and instead gave us a half baked love story and some very confused accents. But there's more to this story than missed chances. In this episode, we will reflect on the film's cultural details, the little authentic things that you might have not noticed, the things that were not so great, and what it really reveals about the fascinating bond between Italians and Italian Americans. Italy is one of the most iconic countries in the world. But what does Italy mean to the world? What does it mean to you?
Buongiorno.
Pizza.
Ciao Bella.
Michelangelo.
Spaghetti.
Mafia. Dolce Vita.
My name is Alessia, I'm Italian, and this is Voices of Italy, the podcast that peels back the layers of the Instagram perfect Italy to reveal everyday stories of authentic, surprising, and messy Italian life. As a born and raised Sicilian, I've always been fascinated by Italian American culture and Italian American people. I have this very, very, very far away in time memory from my childhood of a few Italian American members of my family from my father's side coming in my hometown looking for us, looking for contacts with us. I was really little. I don't remember almost anything about it, but I remember how really left an impression on me thinking about those people that were just like me, but a few years before, going all the way on the other side of the world and becoming American. And since, all I knew about the States, of course, came from pop culture, stuff like movies, video games, and music that I was, of course, very exposed to and that I liked so much and that felt so different than what I was used to locally in Sicily. So the idea of this sort of extra American part of my family always felt very, very cool to me. And this is something that got reinforced when something similar happened to me in my early 20s. And someone that turned out to be a cousin of mine, literally, we're probably sharing a grandparent or close to that, was this middle-aged Italian American woman that one day just called on the phone in my parents' home in Sicily and simply said that she was looking for us, that we were sharing that last name and she was looking for family to come in Sicily for the first time and meet us and see where her family came from. I really cannot express with words how cool that sounded to me. And so, coming back to the topic of this episode, coming back to Netflix last movie Nonnas, I immediately felt like the premise of the story was very cool, because if we look at the other two movies that I talked about on the podcast, La Dolce Villa and Toscana, that I talked about in episode 4 and 15, are both definitely different types of Italy themed Netflix movies. They're both, first of all, very romantic in principle. It wants to be a romantic movie, probably with that target of, girls imagining their own love story among the Italian hills of Tuscany. But when it comes to Nonna, we're in the States and we have this unusual focus of the story, which is older women. It's already something, regardless of the Italian theme here, it's already not very common to have a deep focus on older women and their background, especially as immigrants. So the potential, the premise was something that really made me super curious. And I have to say, that I was probably getting my expectation a little too high with this context because, first of all, yes, obviously the story revolves around Joe Scaravella's restaurant in Staten Island, which was born with this idea of bringing in people that want to feel again like when someone they loved was cooking for them. So giving them this sense, this experience of family comfort more than just a restaurant, and doing this through the cooking of real Italian grandmas cooking with their heart as if they were cooking for their own family. So that's the initial premise that obviously this movie could not exist without the nonnas, right? And so the story that it's about, because real life Joe actually dedicated the restaurant to his own mother and grandmother, so they are the center of the movie, they are the center of the story in any way that you can possibly look at it. However, in the movie, definitely the focus is more on Joe, on the protagonist, on his life, his struggle to financial stability. Apparently, we start with his dear friend Bruno, played by the amazing Joe Manganiello. I'm a great fan if you're listening, who actually always tries to bring him on the right path of financial stability. The protagonist Joe loses his mother, and his mother leaves him quite a significant amount of money. However, obviously he is very depressed and very sad about his loss. His friends are worried about him, and so they encourage him to use the money to do something that brings him back to living his own life. And Bruno, the character played by Joe Manganiello, always tries to encourage him a little bit to do the right thing to do, pay off your debts, put yourself again in a good position. But Joe wants to open a restaurant because it's something that he essentially wants to feel closer to his mom again through her cooking, because he has this amazing memories with his mother and his nonna. And actually, the initial scene of the movie, I have to say, was really, really moving and really adorable. Playbook, cute Italian nonna cooking for her little grandson. So that was really, really cute and definitely starts the movie with the right foot. I just feel like that mood, that nostalgia really got lost a little bit throughout in the story. And to make long story short, I feel like it's too much about Joe and, his life struggles and his love story with this invented character that doesn't exist in reality, that is played by the lovely Linda Cardellini. She is a former high school kind of girlfriend, love interest. However, they really fell apart because he acted like the teenage guy that he was back then, treated her really badly for their prom. So he was really, ashamed about it when they randomly meet in this lovely Italian market. I feel like definitely I wanted to know more about the grandmas that are just very superficially introduced to us. The initial quick presentation, she is from here. Here's a brief summary of whatever you need to know about her, and moving on to the next nonna. Like, they didn't really go much deeper than that, which is really, really a pity, but I'll go back to that in a second, because I want to start by talking about the first thing that everybody that is Italian American, interested in Italian or Italian American culture and movies thinks about when they start watching or hearing about this movie, which is the language slash accent aspect. Even though I have to admit, I'm not very much of an expert when it comes to that whole New Jersey, New York, Staten Island, Brooklyn kind of accents, or, different slangs. I'm really not an expert, but both Joe Manganiello and Vince Vaughn, I didn't think they sounded particularly Italian American. But letting that aside, even the nonnas were definitely super American sounding, without zero familiarity with any of the Italian that they were trying to say. Actually, in this case, I'm only referring to two of the nonnas that were introduced in the movie as if they were, well, not Italian Americans, but Italians Like they're saying she comes from Sicily, she comes from Bologna. And I'm talking about Roberta and Antonella, the two characters that are played by Lorraine Bracco and Brenda Vaccaro, which is kind of funny for me to say because I'm very familiar with the last name Vaccaro. My uncle's last name on my mom's side is Vaccaro, so for me it's funny to say in this context. But those two characters are introduced to us as coming from Italy, and it doesn't really look like they made an effort, to be honest, to make anything about them more authentic. I mean, I love Lorraine Bracco. She's like 80% of why I wanted to watch this movie. I'm a super fan of The Sopranos, and if I have to be honest, I'm not a big fan of like gangster kind of movies. I guess as I'm one of those Sicilians that can't really detach super easily from certain topics like organized crime and that kind of thing, making it look too cool. But The Sopranos are just a masterpiece. I probably said something like that before in the podcast, and I will say many other times. Anyway, Ren Bracco, which another I think about it, that's also a last name that I'm very familiar with. Someone that I was in high school, a classmate of mine, her last name was Bracco. But anyway, I was really excited about seeing her in something new. And again, they barely made an effort. At the beginning, it started kind of well. I felt happy that they used an authentic Sicilian phrase. I heard at a certain point, I think it was actually Joe's grandma, Domenica, that says to him, Vienika, which means come here in Sicilian in the opening scene. The scene was absolutely lovely. But then the nonna in the other scenes where she pronounces a little bit of Italian, also she doesn't sound like an Italian speaking at all. I'm sorry. And given what the context is, what they're when you look at the scene, you can see the difference between his nonna and his mom, for example, that speaks a lot less Italian and she just sounds American. So instead on the nonna, they're putting more on an emphasis on the Sicilian. So it just makes you think that she's Sicilian. Otherwise, she would just speak English. But unfortunately, they didn't bother finding an Italian old lady, or at least a bilingual, I don't know, someone that spoke both kind of fluently. In general, when it comes to everything in this movie that is kind of referred to as Sicilian, or it's implied that it's supposed to be and sound like Sicilian, it doesn't sound like that to me. And oh my God, that there was actually something that was a little bit annoying in this regard, and it's something that happens quite a few times in the movie with Roberta, Lorraine Bracco's character. She's the Sicilian nonna, and every now and then she says a phrase or a word in supposedly Italian or Sicilian, but there is this one thing that they make her say more than once, and I swear I don't know which still at this time what she's supposed to be saying. Essentially, it's scenes where she's supposed to say like yes or sure, and it sounds to me like she's saying something like se, like that. And they imply that that's supposed to be the Sicilian way to say it. When I mean implied, I mean that the first meeting between Roberta and Antonella, Roberta goes with that weird word or say, I don't get it. And Antonella reacts by, turning her head towards her and saying, "Are you Sicilian?" As if that's like a super recognizable, I don't know, Sicilian word for yes. I don't know. But to me, the sound means nothing. And I was actually watching the movie in English with Italian subtitles, and I have noticed that all those parts where she's supposed to speak Sicilian in the Italian translation is written in Sicilian, but it doesn't reflect what she's saying. Like in this case, with this weird say word, when she says it, it's written in the subtitles as "certo," is the Sicilian word to say sure, of course, So I'm like, okay, so that thing that she's saying is supposed to sort of mean that, but that's not what she's saying. I don't even understand why they would imply that. To me, it just sounded like she was saying see or something like that, but in a rougher kind of Sicilian way, maybe. I don't know. And this really drove me crazy to the point that the moment I finished the movie, I went on Reddit because I knew someone on Reddit would write about this. And I was right. I found this conversation where lots of people. I couldn't find anyone that wasn't interested or was talking about that weird say sound that Roberta was making, but they were definitely quite agitated around the language topic in the movie. There was this one guy that mentioned something that really bothered me as well. It was a part where all the characters were going around saying this word madone or mandone, something like that. And here again in the subtitles it was translated as mutande, and I think they were some way kind of trying to make the characters say mutande, so the word for underwear in Italian, but in some sort of Neapolitan kind of way. But and I tried to see if anyone in the comments or online if that actually means underwear in Neapolitan, but no, it seems to be just a word that they were pronouncing randomly, but that it makes no sense for us. And so lots of those people on Reddit were a little annoyed at how those things were pronounced because honestly, you don't need to. If they're Italian Americans, then it's more than understandable if they don't speak Italian or if they speak another variant of Italian. But if you introduce to me a character telling me that they come straight up from the land, the motherland, well, then I'm sorry, make a little effort, just chat GPT, authentic words in Sicilian. I don't know. I really don't think it was such a high expectation, especially for things that are not even supposed to be so complex to translate. Like even such a simple word as perfect in Italian is perfetto, but in the movie gets pronounced as perfecto with a T. I know it's not a huge difference. I don't want to be a hater here. It's just that it seems so low effort. It really doesn't seem like that was, just part of the plan. It just seems like honestly laziness towards those details. And there are even parts where these kind of problems impact the conversation directly. This is going to be a little bit of a spoiler for those that are curious about how the movie goes, so maybe skip ahead of 20 seconds. But there's this final scene near the end of the movie where one of the nonnas actually in one of the final scenes near the end of the movie where they're sharing personal experiences, especially about their families. And this one shares that she had a mastectomy before. So obviously, all the others are feeling really sad. It's a sad scene. And Loren Bracco's character tries to say, supposed to be saying, I'm sorry, but in Italian. But instead, she says piace, which in Italian means I like it. Obviously, it's really awkward. It's a small difference because in Italian it would have been mi spiace with an S. It's a small difference, but exactly because of that, it would have been so easy to do it well in one of the, most emotional scenes of the movie, I should say. But there are even others involving this same character that are really just sloppy like that are supposed to carry emotionally a little bit more weight in the movie, but that quality bar to me goes down because of that clear lack of effort. And food too. Food obviously is the other big protagonist of the movie, together with the nonnas. And from the very beginning, the very first scenes are focused on food. And I was really happy to see, for example, the baci di dama. It's one of those little cookies that are shown at the beginning. It looks like a pokeball kind of, but a cookie version of a pokeball, like with this little chocolate middle part, because I don't imagine that it's very very well known out there. It was cute to see. It's a very typical Piemonte dessert, but there was of course also cassata, which is a Sicilian dessert, and zeppole, lots of authentic and really like authentic looking desserts. What I was a little more doubtful about at the beginning was this connection between Roberta's character and the Capuzzella. Well, first of all, honestly didn't even know what it was. And again, she's Sicilian, so I was surprised that I didn't know what it was. And doing a quick research, well, it seems like real life Joe said that that was a dish that his nonna used to prepare. But in any case, in the movie, they didn't connect the capuzzella to Joe's grandma. They make it part of the story of Roberta's character instead. It's one of those things that you're making so many changes already. Why not choosing maybe a dish that belongs more to the character again, because she's Sicilian. And when I looked it up, other than these sort of Neapolitan dish, when it comes to Sicily, actually seems like it's kind of connected to a religious practice that involves preserving the skulls of your dear ones that have passed away. And again, honestly, I didn't know about this either, so it was cool. But it seems like in general it was maybe a South Italian kind of dish, because again, the capuzzella, the version that they're mentioning in the movie, is essentially a lamb head with vegetables and of course herbs, and it's baked. And in that version, when you look it up, it looks like more of a campagna dish, but probably again they have common roots in South Italy in general. The other thing that was a little curious to me is the fact that they were calling tomato sauce gravy. In Italian, we have a word that we use that means just tomato sauce, and it's sugo. So I've always thought that the actual translation of sugo is sauce, not gravy. So I would think that that's kind of inaccurate as well, because again, sugo for us is pretty straightforward. That's exactly what it means. However, I understand from what I saw that it might be a little bit of a difference between how they say it in Staten Island and in other areas, like in Brooklyn. And so apparently in some places maybe it's more common to say gravy, in other places it's more common to be sauce. But that kind of thing honestly doesn't really make much of a difference. Again, I think representing Italian American culture is really, really cool in itself. It doesn't need to resemble Italian culture. Italian American culture is its own beautiful mix of traditions, and that's why when I talk about authenticity and missed opportunities with this movie, that's not what I'm referring. However, again, I feel like there was a huge missed opportunity more in, maybe telling about the Italian diaspora in America and the relationship between Italian and Italian American culture, and doing so through the nonnas. That's the real waste opportunity, because it's supposed to be about them and the Italian or Italian American community. But the real protagonist here, first of all, as I was saying before, is Bond's character, Scarabella. And the nonnas in the film are not modeled after any specific women who worked at Enoteca Maria before. And even Linda Cardellini's character, Olivia, was invented for the big screen. And so it was a wasted opportunity to tell real stories, especially because if you dig hard enough and you find out something about those women, they all must have a hell of a story to tell. And that already honestly wasn't the easiest thing to do. I only found one and only one article from Time that was telling a little bit about the real women that inspired those characters, or in any case, that were part of the real story of Enoteca Maria. And for the very few lines that I read already, I found it very, very compelling, and I'm dying to see a movie that talks about them instead of having a superficial Sicilian character and a flat Antonella that is supposed to be, I don't know, maybe standing for North Italians and never really says anything authentic about herself, about her life. But anyway, going back to real life grandma chefs, I only found a few details about three of them. One of them was called Carmelina Pica. She was the fourth of 14 kids who worked in a sewing factory and were making appetizers for an Italian market on Staten Island. That's already very fascinating, and it's very reflective of a lot of families back then. I've heard from my mom so many times. She was born in the 60s, and here in Sicily it was super common for even the poorest families to have like 4 to 15 kids because you know patriarchy and poverty, that it's already one way that could have used to talk about why many people left. Many people decided to start such a long and dangerous journey to the other side of the world and how it affected them. But at the same time, of the great opportunity that they had arriving in the States and what it meant to them. Another real life chef at the Enoteca Maria was Adelina Orazzo, who grew up in a little town in the outskirts of Naples and got engaged to be married when she was only 13 years old. The marriage later fell apart, but just like her counterpart in Nonnas, she found a new purpose when her niece saw Scarabella's ad for cooks, and he gave her free reign in the kitchen. Same here. The potential of a story like this, of course, is incredibly interesting, and it would have contributed even more to really talk about the struggles of, especially of women, when it comes to also the family culture that Italian Americans probably had back then. The third one that the article from Time was talking about is Teresa Scalici, known for her cookies at Enoteca Maria. She lived with her grandmother in Sicily in her teenage years, and then she raised a family on Staten Island and went to work for Scarabella at the age of 60, often carrying around a book of recipes that her own grandmother put together. How cute would have been for one of the grandmas to have their own book of recipes from their grandmother. What I'm saying here is it would have been a great opportunity to both honor the real women that inspired this initiative that, without which the restaurant couldn't even exist and the movie couldn't even exist, by maybe maintaining some of those details and also, offering those stories as a way to talk about Italian Americans and their struggles and, the authentic stories of Italians moving to the US back then. And as you know, if you listen to this podcast, I am obsessed with authentic stories, especially if we're talking about Italian stories. And that's why I really found that it was a huge pity that none of this is vaguely mentioned. None of them, either by name or by the few details that I could read in the article from Time, are vaguely mentioned in any details. The characters are completely rewritten, but in a, I have to say, unfortunately, superficial level. I was happy to see that at least in terms of cast, they really tried to make an effort to cast Italian American actors. I didn't know, to be honest, that Vince Vaughn and Susan Sarandon have Italian roots, but apparently, yes, at least in part, they have Italian roots. But by the way, I challenge you to watch any American movie or show and like try to do it like some sort of little alcohol game with your friends, that every time that you see someone in the credits that has an Italian sounding last name, you take a shot of alcohol and you will have fun because there's always quite a lot. And oh my god, I was so happy to see Drea De Matteo and Lorraine Bracco again from The Soprano. They're really great as always. Drea De Matteo's character was lovely as usual. She has a little bit of this archetype of the Peperina character, like the spicy Italian character that I really, really love. And I'm really sorry just to say that the kind of less remarkable character here to me is really the protagonist. And apparently the rights to Joe Scarabella's life were bought quite a few years ago. So I don't know how much he had to say about how all this was written and how his life was translated into the movie. But I definitely think that him too was lacking a little bit of depth. In general, Nona's really let me down quite a bit, but definitely gave me a little bit more of that Italian American experience that I sometimes look for in a movie. I am really, really curious about Italian American communities. It's just that I feel like this kind of entertainment products sort of feeds too much that stereotypical kind of Italian identity and creates a lot of confusion when it comes to Italian and Italian American identity. This is really more because they are two different identities and they're both equally fascinating and deserving respect. And I don't think it's fair to either to just confuse them and put them in one pot and feed it to people as just funny Italian things to watch without a little bit of an effort. Our stories as Italians, Italian Americans, or simply people fascinated by identity, heritage, and belonging deserve to be told with depth, nuance, even when there's a pinch of irony in there. Italian identity is not just pasta and end gestures, they're about people in motion and in contradiction and in transformation. And that makes us just as special. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Voices of Italy. Watch the movie. Tell me what you think. Tell me your experience. I'm really interested in having a conversation with you guys and learning more about Italian and Italian American identity. And if you're hungry for some more authentic Italian American stories, I highly recommend a movie called Napoli, New York, directed by Gabriele Salvatore. It's a story that was nearly lost to time, written by Federico Fellini and Tullio Pinelli in the late 1950s, and then rediscovered decades later in a trunk full of forgotten papers. The movie follows two young boys, Carmine and Celestino, who flee post-war Naples and board a ship bound for New York, hidden among other migrants.